Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're jumping straight into Chapter 28 of Rick Clark's Strategic Manifesto. We're looking at the organizational shift required to achieve true observability. And look, the reason we're doing this explainer is because the label on your monitoring tool simply does not change its actual capability. You can spend absolute millions on shiny new software, but if you don't fundamentally change how your organization operates, you haven't really changed a thing. It's a massive socio-technical shift, meaning it's where the messy human element of people and culture directly collide with your technology. So here is our playbook for diagnosing exactly where you currently stand and how to actually pull off this transformation. We'll hit the fake observability trap, explore why organizations fight change so hard, how to build your power coalition, how to lock in that executive mandate, the roadmap for the actual transformation, and finally, how to structure your observability team for the long haul. All right, part 1, the fake observability trap. Let's diagnose your system. We need to start by facing a really uncomfortable truth right out of the gate. You likely have legacy observability masquerading as modern observability. This is about taking a hard look at where you actually stand, not where your vendor promises you stand, and definitely not where your feelings say you stand. The industry is currently suffering from this massive cognitive dissonance. You might have bought all the expensive tools, you might have retrained your staff, maybe even rebranded your old monitoring team to the observability team. But if your dashboards are proudly glowing green while mysteries still exist in your system and your customers are still finding bugs before you do, you're trapped. You're completely stuck in this fake observability trap. To actually prove this, Chapter 28 lays out 5 incredibly sharp diagnostic tests. Test number 1, the ownership test. True observability means developers actually own the instrumentation and get an immediate feedback loop on their code. They don't just throw it over the wall to the operations team and hope for the best. Think about it. When an engineer ships code at your company, do they immediately check a dashboard to see how their specific business logic is behaving in production? Do they write custom instrumentation for it? If the answer is no, or if they have to wait hours for an ops team to tell them something broke, you are running legacy monitoring. This is that socio-technical disconnect. If the person writing the code isn't getting the feedback directly, buying more software is just pouring water into a leaky bucket. Moving to test 2, the 2 or 3 people test. We've all been there, right? It's 3 a.m., the system is down, and only your 2 senior rockstar engineers actually know how to investigate it, while everyone else just sits around helpless. That means all the critical knowledge is trapped inside people's heads, instead of being baked into the system. In a legacy environment, the tools are so incredibly complex and siloed that if those experts leave the company, your institutional knowledge vanishes with them. That's a terrifying organizational risk. But modern observability encodes that context right into the system. By using structured, high-cardinality data, it empowers 60 to 80% of your engineers to independently investigate issues without waking up the principal engineer in the middle of the night. Then there's the folklore test. I love this one because it hits so close to home. In legacy systems, recurring mysteries just become permanent facts of life. People say stuff like, oh, latency is just always higher on Tuesdays. Or, yeah, that microservice just restarts itself sometimes, don't worry about it. Everyone just accepts it because digging into it is just too hard. It literally becomes engineering folklore. But in modern observability, those mysteries become highly specific, investigatable problems. Because you can slice and dice raw telemetry data without it being pre-aggregated, a vague complaint like, we have a random load spike, turns into a concrete fact. Like, the batch analytics job for tenant X is triggering 40,000 database queries because the query plan changed. Test 4 is brutal but necessary. The customer-driven debugging test. It asks a simple question. Do your internal alerts fire before the customer feels the pain, or are your users basically acting as your monitoring system? If your first indicator of an outage is a spike in angry support tickets or a bunch of complaints on social media, your telemetry has completely failed you. You're stuck in a completely reactive posture. Modern observability actually tracks the real user experience in real time, catching the very bleeding edge of an issue. The goal is to notify the on-call engineer before the customer even has time to notice a dropped transaction. And our final diagnostic, the read-only Friday test. This beautifully illustrates the difference between fear and confidence. If your company bans deployments on Fridays or relies on massive change advisory boards to deliberately slow everything down because slowing down feels like your only safety net, well, you're operating in a culture of fear. You fundamentally don't trust your tools to catch regressions. Modern observability totally replaces that fear with hard evidence. With fast feedback loops, your teams can routinely deploy multiple times a day with total confidence because they know for a fact they can instantly spot and revert any issue. Okay, moving into part 2. Why organizations fight this change so hard. The immune response. So, having gone through those 5 tests, you've diagnosed the problem. You have the evidence. But here's the catch. When you present this evidence, you're going to face immediate systemic pushback. So why do organizations instinctively fight a change that is so clearly beneficial to everyone? It's not just because people are stubborn. If you look at the underlying incentives and the psychological safety of the teams, the resistance is actually highly rational. Think of your organization as a living body. When you introduce a major paradigm shift, it triggers a literal immune response. Antibodies swarm the threat to neutralize it. Legacy vendors are absolutely going to fight to keep their lucrative contracts. They'll often bypass you and go straight to executives to kill your initiative. Your own leadership is going to be skeptical because, let's be honest, they've probably seen grand modernization projects fail quietly before, burning cash with 0 results. Committees will naturally form just to evaluate the options until your momentum completely dies. And crucially, your existing teams will resist because their budgets, their headcount, and their professional identities are all tied up in the legacy systems you're trying to replace. And this brings us directly into the vendor identity trap. When an engineer's entire professional worth is tied to a single tool, a new platform is an existential threat. When someone says, I'm the Splunk person, or I'm the Datadog expert, that's not just a job title. That is years of hard-won expertise, certifications, and internal clout. They are the person who saves the day when things break. Asking them to just drop that tool feels like you're telling them to start their entire career over. You can't just mandate that away. You have to give them a better, more portable professional identity. Which leads us to part 3, building your power coalition. You absolutely cannot fight that organizational immune response alone. You have to transform individual frustrations into a collective force. You need allies who feel the daily pain of the legacy systems and actually have the standing to change things. So while you definitely need to honor the heroes currently keeping production running at 3 a.m., you also need to recruit unlikely allies. Go find the security team that desperately needs distributed tracing but is currently flying blind across microservices. Talk to the platform engineers who get blamed every time a deployment breaks because developers have no visibility. Connect with customer support reps who have to deal with furious users without any telemetry to explain what went wrong. And definitely speak to the engineering managers who are totally burned out from organizing massive war rooms for every little outage. These people already know it's broken. Your job is to unite them with a shared language and hard evidence. Part 4. Securing the executive mandate. Sponsorship versus authority. Once you've got your coalition and your evidence, it's time to secure the power to enforce the new system. You're moving from just complaining about the problem to requiring action. And for that, you need executive authority. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand the difference between mere sponsorship and true authority. Sponsorship is basically organizational theater. It gets you polite nods in a meeting, maybe a shout out at an all hands, but ultimately adoption remains optional and teams will just revert to their old habits. Authority, on the other hand, establishes a minimum viable mandate. It means a leader with real budget and structural power explicitly states that all new services or any major re-architectures must use the new approach. It becomes a non-negotiable policy built right into your pipeline. Part 5. The Transformation Roadmap. So you have the mandate. Now what? If you just blindly enforce it everywhere on day one, it will collapse under its own weight, or you'll just get malicious compliance. You need a tactical rollout plan. Treat it like a strategic product launch. Start small. Pick one domain with a team that is actually excited to try something new. Do not pick your most critical, high-pressure system. That's way too risky. And don't pick your worst, debt-ridden legacy system either, because that'll drain all your momentum. Pick a willing team, deeply instrument their domain, and start solving those old folklore mysteries we talked about. Get those concrete wins. Then, and this is the key, rerun those initial 5 diagnostic tests to definitively prove that the capability has shifted. When the rest of the organization sees that success, adoption will follow. Finally, part 6, structuring your observability team. To keep this whole thing running smoothly, you need a dedicated observability team. But remember, this team doesn't do observability for the company. Their job is to build the paved paths so software engineers can do it themselves. And to build that team, you need 3 very different temperaments. Because forcing a pioneer to do a town planner's job is a disaster waiting to happen. First, you have pioneers. They thrive in pure chaos. They're the ones who will figure out how to instrument that undocumented legacy black box. Then you have settlers. They take what the pioneers hacked together and turn it into scalable frameworks and solid documentation. Finally, you have the town planners. They step in to optimize costs, maintain long-term stability, and manage vendor relationships. You need all three of these mindsets deployed at exactly the right phases to prevent team burnout and actually scale the platform. And here is how you tie it all together and fix that vendor identity trap we talked about earlier. By embracing open standards like open telemetry, you're actually offering your engineers a much better, future-proof career path. You sit down with your resident tool expert and you tell them, you aren't just the Splunk person anymore, you are a telemetry architect. Their deep knowledge of distributed systems is no longer held hostage by one vendor's proprietary ecosystem. It becomes an industry-wide, portable, open standard skill. You are elevating their identity, which totally neutralizes that immune response. So I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Are you going to keep endlessly patching your legacy systems, paying massive vendor bills, and burning out your best engineers on midnight war room calls? Or are you going to secure that executive mandate and actually build true observability capability? This socio-technical shift is slow. It's highly political. Your organization's immune system will fight you at every turn. But as we've seen in this explainer of Chapter 28, the cost of doing nothing is an engineering culture paralyzed by fear, reacting to customers instead of leading them. It's time to take the evidence, build your coalition, and start your transformation. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.